Alistair, take it away.
Well, good afternoon. I'm getting a bit croaky after 25 years. I'm so pleased to be here. It's good to see so many old friends and colleagues again. And first, thank you very much to the board of Dystonia Europe for inviting me to talk to you today. It's an honor to be involved in the celebration of all that Dystonia Europe has achieved over the past 25 years and still has to go on to achieve, because we haven't solved the problem yet. So there's some way to go, and there are lots of other things to do. Now, other people are going to talk more later about these achievements, but my task to try to focus on how Dystonia Europe began, why it began, and take a brief look at some of the people in the organizations who've contributed so much over the last 25 years. Now, first of all, many of you, the younger people, may not understand that dystonia was even less well known 25 years ago than it is now. And in those early days, many of the medical profession, even among neurologists, had never come across it. It's quite astonishing, but it's true. And in the 1980s and early 90s, there were very few specialists with knowledge of dystonia, and dystonia diagnosis and treatment were very hard to find. Patient advocacy was just beginning. And in fact, I'm not sure that the word advocacy was used, because patient advocacy in those days was really bringing patients together, giving them the best information that we could find on the illness, and real advocacy representing the interests of patients to improve the availability of medical care. That was a step to come, and it was just starting. And without that advocacy, things get left behind for small-scale illnesses like dystonia, and we'll come to the scale in a little while. The macro health agenda, the big health agenda, is the one which moves politicians normally, and that's when little, small-scale illnesses are left behind. So, as medical science develops and illnesses become better understood, we can make strides forward in terms of awareness, which Professor Santons was mentioning, and that is still a major thing to do. And if I can, how do I move the slides? Just, no. Yeah.
No, this is the pointer.
Okay. Fine, thank you. Professional interest in dystonia was something to think about seriously. And there were very few of them who were deeply involved in dystonia. But a few were working very hard, including two, one of whom was mentioned earlier, Professor David Marsden, and the other was Professor Stanley Fan in New York. Both of these gentlemen are extremely well known in movement disorder circles. Stanley Fan is still a very senior person in movement disorders and in dystonia, certainly around the world. David Marsden, as most of you know, sadly died very early in 1998, and he's badly missed, but many people still keep his memory alive at meetings with awards and special presentations and so on. By the mid-1980s, these two gentlemen and others, Eduardo Tolosa in Barcelona, Andrew Lees in London, Joe Jankovic in Houston, and yes, that was it, I think. They decided it would be a good idea to form a society for movement disorders. And in 1985, in a hotel room in Hamburg, they met and discussed it and decided, yes, that's what they would do. So by 1990, they had their first Congress, and in 1992, They had their second. But before we go there, let's look at something else. I mentioned the scale of different illnesses. Estimates of the numbers of illnesses and the numbers of patients are always difficult to make precise. But the best estimates that have been seen, so I'm told, of all human illnesses is that there are probably about 30,000. That's an incredible number. How can the medical profession possibly deal with that? And a total of more than 600 neurological illnesses. 600. 1 billion neurological patients in the world. Epilepsy, 50 million patients. Parkinson's, about 10 million. Even more difficult to be precise the lower down the scale you go in terms of the number of patients. Dystonia, that's almost a blind guess. I'm basing it on a guess of Professor Alberto Albanese that there may be 3 million in Europe. That's for all dystonia syndromes. But those are the kind of figures that we have to consider in terms of getting our awareness up and various other things. So in 1993, the European Dystonia Federation was founded to bring national patient groups together. And in 2011, it was realized that we needed a new outlook. And the organization was reshaped to become Dystonia Europe, more of a platform for all dystonia stakeholders so that we could encourage other people, especially the medical profession and the policy makers, to become involved with us because we would be dealing with them on a more professional basis. So it's not only a federation now, it still is very strongly a federation of national patient groups, but it's more than that. So, what was the position for dystonia patients in '93? I've already said it wasn't well recognized by the medical profession, and who can blame them? Diagnosis was therefore more difficult to find, and treatment was not very good, to be honest. Botulinum toxin wasn't yet the treatment of choice. It was being used, but to a limited extent, for focal dystonia. Patient groups were few and new and underdeveloped, and many of these groups focused on only one type of dystonia, such as Blepharospasm, torticollis, dysphonia. The German group DGG, for instance, D.D. Jackson, started off as a spasmodic dysphonia group, but very quickly changed to being a general dystonia group, not generalized, but general dystonia. And although clinicians and researchers are working in international partnerships more and more, there wasn't a great deal of very widespread collaboration in dystonia. And possibly most important of all, the influence of the European Union decisions was increasing in the field of health. And during a workshop on dystonia that I was leading in Munich at the Movement Disorder Society's second Congress, alongside it, not part of the main meeting, of course, to help leaders of some of the newly formed patient groups in Europe. I realized that we couldn't just work nationally or locally, and we had to reach out to one another, stronger groups helping the weaker and so on, present a more professional approach. We needed to work in partnership. And I had come across Allergan, and I mean come across because companies weren't in the business then. They weren't in the dystonia market, apart from Allergan, which had a pan-European marketing focus. And I approached them for funding to have preparatory meetings, and we did with a few of the larger groups in Europe. We had a meeting in Barcelona and one in Paris where I met the famous Professor Rondeau, who was a lovely man, but he reminded me of President de Gaulle, I must say, because he was very tall and he said no a lot. And in Britain we remember that, you know, especially now that we're leaving. So in Italy, on the 18th of June 1993, we had a final meeting at which we took the step of formally creating the European Dystonia Federation. And I ask you to remember that while all these communications were going on, there was no access to the internet. There were no mobile phones. We used faxes, and sending a 9 or 10-page fax to 12 different people in one evening took a long time. And it was very, very expensive and quite incredible. Very, very different days. And here, if I can find it, are the brave people who founded it. And if we look at, is there a pointer on here? No, there isn't. Hiding. The top one?
No, the third.
No, bottom
The
one.
third from the top.
Sorry?
That one.
Right, thank you. Here we have, well, very quickly. I was yes, I had black hair then, somewhere. Oh, that one, there, him, yes. It was a long time ago. And I was honored to be appointed president, and Laura Latini from Italy was appointed as vice president. She was followed some years later by Feli Justo Alonso from Spain, and some years after that, Didi Jackson, this lady here, who sadly, very sadly, died only a few weeks ago. She was appointed vice president in due course, and after that, she also became president, and was president for 6 years, I think. And then we have Alan Lang, who at that time was the executive director of the Dystonia Society in the UK. I was the vice chair of that at the time. And Gunilla Noren from Sweden, and Tora Virgenes from Norway, Jean-Marc Bildin from France, and guess who this is? The wonderful Professor Maya Ralya. Where are you, Maya? It's lovely to see you. Maya has been a true friend for over these 25 years. And this lady here is Beppie Smitshoek, who was, I think at the time, the chair of the society in the Netherlands. And here we have this wonderful logo, which looks like a man being electrocuted, I always thought. So I was very happy when we changed it to something that was a bit more interesting. There was another vice president I should mention, who was Ginger Butler. Many of you will remember him. He was a warm and larger-than-life character from the northeast of England. And he gained a PhD based on epidemiology and dystonia, of all things. And he had no medical training. But he carried out several research studies before he died unexpectedly, sadly, in 2012. Many specialists around the world have become senior figures in movement disorders, trained with David Marsden and with Stanley Fan, of course, but in Europe more with David Marsden. And two of these neurologists you'll also recognize. On the left, and they were both young in 1993. On the left is Professor Tom Warner, who was our sole medical advisor for many years, and he contributed many ideas and gently guided us away from many mistakes. And he's remained a close friend of Dystonia Europe. Our relationship with Alberto, of course, it also stretches back to the very beginning of Dystonia Europe in 1993. And we've collaborated with him on many projects, not least the research network that was referred to earlier. He's still a good friend. So let's take a look at how the medical profession's interest has improved, shall we put it. It's certainly increased over these years. You can see there just the Movement Disorder Society congresses. The numbers have increased quite substantially. And then the European Academy of Neurology, their annual Congress programs always include several dystonia sessions. They have a very close association with the Movement Disorder Society, and they run these together. And European Academy of Neurology, or EFNS as it used to be, European Federation of Neurological Societies, has been a central figure in a number of initiatives for neurology across Europe, especially the foundation of EFNA and the foundation of EBC. And you'll hear more about those later. So don't worry, I'm not going to steal your thunder. The president at the time of EFNS was Jes Olesen, a headache specialist from Denmark. And these were his ideas, EFNA and EBC. He brought them to patients and to the other scientists and brought the thing forward. And I was very happy to be involved deeply in the formation of these two organizations too. So then we come to another series of congresses which has sprung up in Europe and is extremely successful. And you'll hear from Professor Dirk Dressler today or tomorrow, I can't remember, tomorrow, who's one of the three, the triumvirate in Hanover, who run these. These have been very successful conferences, and many people attending, of course. And then we come to our own patient group running scientific meetings. Wow, that was unheard of 25 years ago. We had a very successful conference in Hamburg in 2008, and even more, oh sorry, it's still Hamburg. I just thought I'd show you a photograph for a break. It's a lovely city. And in 2011, we had a tremendously successful meeting with 550 participants from all over the world and more than 50 scientific speakers, top-class speakers in Dystonia. It was an amazing event. And since then, people have started talking about the Dystonia community, which is nice. And there's a picture of the scene. I think you can probably just see, I've just noticed it, but can you see that lady in pink there? Guess who that was? So more professional interest in dystonia. We're aiming to, and always have done, Professor Dirk Dressler, hi Dirk. We've always aimed to try to help specialists, young specialists especially. And the David Marsden Award was the idea of Dee Jackson in 2003. She talked at the board meeting of creating an award in the name of David Marsden because he was such an iconic figure in dystonia. And the board was very happy to do that, and that's been strongly supported by the industry ever since, and for some years now by Ipsen. And then we come to research. There wasn't a lot of research to begin with, as I've already said, but David Marsden suggested to me that it would be a very good idea if we had a better idea of how many people actually had dystonia. So he suggested an epidemiological study, which was coordinated for us by now Professor Tom Warner, across 8 centres in Europe, which was a start, and it produced very good results. And then in 2013, of course, Professor Alberto Albanese had by then made an application to COST, the Cooperation for Science and Technology, an organization even older than the European Union, and it gives grants for research networks to allow them to have meetings, not to fund any research. And that was a very successful group which had more than 400 clinicians and researchers involved at various different times, and not only fostered research partnerships, but ran training schools and gave grants for short-term scientific missions to other countries. And Dystonia Europe was very fully involved in that, as Monica and I can tell you. It was a huge amount of work and very, very worthwhile, over 4 years. And there they are, or some of them anyway, at a meeting in Dublin some years ago. And you can see Maya in the middle there, and Marie Vidaillet, and Alberto, and Jean-Pierre Bleton, and Tom Warner, and a whole lot of others. Rose, sorry, Rose, there you are. And then there was the founding of EFNA. I think it was about 97 or 98, I can't remember exactly. And the founding of European Brain Council. Both of them have been tremendously helpful for neurological patients because of all the work they've done in neurology. And we should say a big thank you to our industrial sponsors, because frankly, without them, none of it would have happened. It would just be impossible for an international organization to function. But we've enjoyed wonderful, open, trusting even, believe it or not. Yes, they're business people, but they're also people. And we've had wonderful relationship with the industry, very clear lines of how we do things, and they've been extremely helpful. I have to say, especially Allergan at the start, because without that support, it would never have got going. And the Foundation for Dystonia Research here in Belgium, two very nice ladies, Great and Lieve, have been very supportive to Dystonia Europe. They acted for a while as a sort of unofficial, I think, although no, we did call them our advisors in research, because they were so deeply interested and informed on research. And of course, they've given support not only to Dystonia Europe, but to many other dystonia projects around the world, and especially here at the department in Leuven, where Rose is the head. I beg your pardon, Professor Goodchild, I've known you too long. And that's a very important focus for dystonia research. And here we have a contrast, I think. And it's a contrast that makes me smile a lot, because on the left, okay, there were 11 groups, and it was 1993, but it all looks a bit staid, you know, as though, well, we've done it. And here on the right, it's just full of life, and people jumping for dystonia, especially that young lady again who was mentioned this morning by another speaker as being able to jump twice as high as the others. You didn't know your executive director was also an athlete, did you? So that's what partnership is all about. And if you continue in the way that you're going, Dystonia Europe, I think we'll get there in the end. I hope so. And thank you very much. If you have been, thanks for listening.